Resident Evil 2, Veronica occupies a strange and fascinating place in survival horror history. Released by Capcom in 2000 for the Sega Dreamcast, it was not numbered like Resident Evil 3 or Resident Evil 4, but in many ways it felt like a major step forward for the series. It arrived after the destruction of Raccoon City, moved the story to isolated locations far from America, and pushed Resident Evil away from static painted backgrounds into real-time 3D environments. For players at the time, this made Code Veronica feel both familiar and unusually cinematic. It still had locked doors, scarce ammunition, fixed tension, and awkward but deliberate tank controls. But visually and tonally, it suggested that Resident Evil was beginning to outgrow its original PlayStation identity. The game's story takes place 3 months after the events of Resident Evil 2 and around the aftermath of Resident Evil 3, Nemesis, where Raccoon City is destroyed because of the viral outbreak. Instead of returning to that ruined city, Code Veronica follows Claire Redfield after her search for her brother Chris leads her into another nightmare. Claire is captured and taken to a remote prison island in the Southern Ocean, a location controlled by the sinister forces connected to the Umbrella Corporation. This setup immediately gives the game a different kind of isolation. Raccoon City was a collapsing urban disaster. Rockfort Island, by contrast, feels like a sealed-off experiment in cruelty, military facilities, prison cells, aristocratic mansions, and secret laboratories all stacked into one hostile environment. Claire Redfield's role is central to why Code Veronica feels like a true continuation of Resident Evil 2. In her earlier appearance, Claire was resourceful but still thrown into chaos as an ordinary civilian looking for her missing brother. By Code Veronica, that experience has changed her. Capcom designed her with a tougher appearance and attitude, reflecting the fact that surviving Raccoon City would leave anyone more hardened and confident. She is still vulnerable, because Resident Evil depends on making even capable characters feel trapped, but she no longer feels naive. She has seen what Umbrella's viruses can do, and she understands that the monsters are not random accidents. They are the result of human ambition, secrecy, and corporate power. Chris Redfield also becomes an important part of the game, connecting Code Veronica back to the original Resident Evil and expanding the Redfield family story. The search between Claire and Chris gives the game a more personal emotional thread than simply escaping another outbreak. This is not just survival for survival's sake. Claire's motivation is family, and Chris's involvement brings the broader anti-Umbrella conflict back into focus. By using both siblings, Code Veronica bridges 2 eras of Resident Evil, the Mansion Incident survivors from the first game and the Raccoon City survivors from the second. It helps make the series feel like one continuing conspiracy rather than a collection of separate zombie disasters. One of the biggest reasons Code Veronica stands apart is its shift in atmosphere. Earlier Resident Evil games often leaned into American horror imagery, police stations, city streets, laboratories, and B-movie zombie chaos. Code Veronica turns toward European Gothic horror. Its environments use Gothic architecture, aristocratic decor, eerie family history, and a more theatrical style of villainy. The game's setting is not just industrial or scientific, it is decadent and haunted by lineage, obsession, and madness. This matters because Resident Evil has always blended science fiction with horror, but Code Veronica pushes the horror closer to melodrama and Gothic tragedy. The result is a game that feels colder, grander, and more operatic than its predecessors. Technically, Code Veronica marked a major change for the franchise. The original Resident Evil games used pre-rendered backgrounds, meaning characters moved over detailed static images. That approach allowed beautiful environments on limited hardware, but the camera angles were fixed and the world was not fully three-dimensional. Code Veronica used real-time 3D environments instead. This allowed dynamic camera movement and gave scenes a more fluid presentation. The change did not completely abandon the classic Resident Evil feel, because the game still used traditional controls and survival horror pacing. But it made the world feel more physically present. Hallways, courtyards, and rooms could now be viewed with movement and depth in ways that hinted at the franchise's future. The game's development history is tied closely to platform changes at the end of the 1990s. Capcom originally wanted to bring Resident Evil 2 to the Sega Saturn, but producer Shinji Mikami and his team learned that a port would not be feasible. Instead of forcing that project, development shifted toward an original Resident Evil title. That original project eventually became Code Veronica. This background explains why the game feels important even without a number in its title. It was not a minor side story built casually for another console. It grew out of a serious attempt to expand Resident Evil beyond its PlayStation home and create something that justified a new platform and new technology. Code Veronica was announced in August 1998 and released in February 2000, but the timing was complicated. The Dreamcast was powerful and beloved by many players, yet it struggled commercially against the coming force of the PlayStation 2 and the shifting console market. Because of that, Capcom reduced sales expectations, and Code Veronica did not sell like the biggest Resident Evil releases on PlayStation. Still, compared with many Dreamcast games, its sales were strong. This creates one of the game's biggest historical contradictions. It was critically acclaimed and respected, but it was attached to a platform that could not give it the same commercial reach as earlier entries. Critical reception was very positive. Reviewers and fans praised Code Veronica as one of the strongest games on the Dreamcast and one of the better entries in the Resident Evil series. Much of that praise came from how it balanced old and new. It did not throw away the survival horror structure that made the series famous. Players still had to manage inventory space, conserve resources, solve environmental puzzles, and learn when to fight or flee. But the new visual presentation, bigger story scope, and gothic setting made it feel more ambitious. For many fans, Code Veronica was the closest thing to a true next-generation Resident Evil before the series eventually reinvented itself again. In 2001, Capcom released an updated version called Code Veronica X for the Dreamcast and PlayStation 2. This revision added new cutscenes that revealed more details about the story, helping clarify character motivations and larger plot connections. The PlayStation 2 release was especially important because it brought the game to a much larger audience than the Dreamcast alone could provide. Later, Code Veronica X was also ported to the GameCube and other platforms. Over time, for many players, Code Veronica X became the default way to experience the game, even though the original Dreamcast version remains historically significant as the first release. The game's legacy continued through remasters and adaptations. In September 2011, Capcom released a high-definition remastered version of Code Veronica X for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, preserving the game for a new generation of console players. Its story was also adapted into other Resident Evil projects, including Resident Evil Survivor 2, Code Veronica in 2002 and Resident Evil: The Dark Side Chronicles in 2009. These adaptations show that Capcom continued to treat Code Veronica as a meaningful chapter in the wider mythology. Even when the main series moved on, the events involving Claire, Chris, Umbrella, and the remote outbreak remained part of the franchise's larger memory. What makes Resident Evil Code Veronica important is not just one feature, one character, or one platform. It is the combination of all of them. It was the first Resident Evil game to debut outside PlayStation, a technical step toward real-time 3D, a story bridge between major characters, and a bold experiment in gothic atmosphere. Its sales were shaped by the Dreamcast's struggles, but its reputation survived far beyond that console generation. With a remake titled Resident Evil Veronica scheduled for 2027, interest in the game is likely to grow again. Code Veronica remains a reminder that some of the most important entries in a series are not always the ones with numbers in the title. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.